Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Behind the scenes of mega events, contractors are running key pieces of event infrastructure, from cyber systems to communications. That's raising new questions about coordination, accountability, and who's responsible when decisions have to happen fast. Joining me to walk through how that works is CEO of the Professional Services Council, Jim Carroll. Jim, great to have you back. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Terry, for having us on.
We have a lot of folks who may be spending their time watching World Cup events now. We're a couple weeks into that, and we've got 4th of July coming up in just a couple of weeks. So as we think about these mega events that are, scattering across the calendar here, where do government contractors actually sit in the security picture?
It's been a busy summer. It's hard to believe that summer is upon us and we're having all of these activities. The World Cup is really exciting to watch, and I bet most of us are watching as many games as we can. What's interesting, is with the World Cup and July 4th coming up is how many of our member companies are contributing to the national security at these events. And it's everything from analysis of, the people coming in and their IDs and checking that. It's also drones, Terry, that are, out there checking the parking lots, checking some of these impromptu street parties, if you will, where the festivals are taking place, and making sure that everyone's being safe. It's really pretty remarkable technology that is happening this summer. And so not much of a summer break for our member companies.
Jim, drones are really a new, at least in the public mind, new addition to the whole security operations here. As we bring in this kind of new technology, how clearly are the roles between government agencies and contractors defined before they get on the ground?
It's a blur. It really is. And it's a wonderful blur in that the government contractors are sitting shoulder to shoulder with their colleagues, the government employees, and executing on this. And Terry, I have to say, since we were talking about summer being upon us, last weekend I went to go see the Blue Angels perform at Patuxent Naval Air Station, just a little bit south of us. And several of our member companies were there, along with maybe 10,000 people in the crowd, but several of our member companies were there because they have the technology to, fly the Blue Angel, some of the other military aircraft. There were also drones, just like you say, the unmanned aerial vehicles on static display. And so many of our companies are manufacturing those for the military. It really is something how drones, whether it's domestically here for security, certainly, for our defense work overseas, the Department of War, we're seeing the military use them more and more. It really is remarkable.
Jim, when you come back to what you said before about contractors and government officials sitting side by side or shoulder to shoulder in ops centers and control centers, how does that affect accountability? If something were to happen, and so far everything seems to have gone pretty smoothly, but if something does go wrong, how is responsibility divided between the agencies and the contractors?
Yeah, thank God nothing's gone wrong, and it'll continue to be that way. I think as any of these things, when something slips through, and it really is, you heard that saying, the bad guys only need to be able to get through once. We need to block it up and be perfect every single time. If something were to happen, the knee jerk is it's going to be an examination of what went wrong and where the responsibility is. And, Terry, I hate to go back to something that was, very difficult, but you remember the DHS shutdown and the impact that had on airport security and some of the cybersecurity really slowing down and negatively impacting national security. And the contractors rely on a well-capitalized funding mechanism, contracting mechanism from the federal government. And now, this week, as most of the summer, they're calling for bad thunderstorms on various days this week. It reminds me of the need for FEMA to be well supplied and ready to go at a moment's notice. And all of that depends on stable funding, not only for the largest companies that we represent, of the 400 member companies of Professional Services Council, but also the small and medium-sized businesses who invest and perform and are ready to go at a moment's notice.
Jim Carroll is CEO of the Professional Services Council. Jim, you were just talking a little bit about cybersecurity, and going back to the mega events, many of the event systems, ticketing, communications, infrastructure are run by contractors. Has that changed expectations for contractors in terms of their own security and resilience?
No, I think they're getting used to it more and more globally. They're doing this not just for the United States, here in the 50 states and plus territories. They're doing it for foreign governments, and they're doing for foreign government presence in other countries. And so our government contractors can do it very efficiently, which means there's less cost for the taxpayer, because we can flex as needed for these events. And it really is remarkable, from looking at your ID on your driver's license to make sure that you're the person that purchased the ticket and is supposed to be at these events. As I said, to making sure that people are being safe. And so it really is remarkable, and it makes for enjoyable games. And Terry, I'm not holding my breath during these games that something's going to go wrong. I'm letting all my breath out with chants and with happy noises from the U.S. winning.
Well, Jim, we talked earlier about the change that drone technology has made in terms of how these events are operated and secured. Another big piece, and you just sort of alluded to it there, is AI behind the scenes, engaged in both cybersecurity and physical security operations. The administration's new AI and cybersecurity executive order puts new emphasis on securing those AI systems. From an industry standpoint, are you seeing that change what contractors are being held accountable for delivering?
We are. And, GSA did roll out a request for comments for upcoming rulemaking for artificial intelligence systems. This request is a little bit different than the previous one, which came out a few months ago. This one, we went in and met with GSA, with some of our member companies. It seems that GSA listened and understand that some of the regulations, I'll say, some of the rules that they were talking about would actually limit AI solutions. And so this one seems to be much more targeted, a better balance, but it also something that our companies are very concerned about, not only from a national security perspective, but also even from a business sensitive issue of making sure that there is sufficient safeguards put around our American systems with AI. And so it's building a defense around the AI, and without the sort of onerous restrictions of regulatory burdens. It really does seem to understand that the companies need to just take the normal safeguards to prevent interference. And I do think it shows that AI is here to stay. It's interesting, Terry, like I read a lot about AI, talk to a lot of our member companies who are using it. I think all of us who use it or supply it to the federal government believe that it will be there forever. I've seen some articles lately that AI is a bubble. For a variety of reasons we don't have time to talk about on today's show. I just don't think that's going to happen. There might be some narrowing of the field, but Terry, it's ingrained in the use of so many people these days, both in the government and out of the government, that having some safeguards around it, I think is a good rational approach.
It does sort of feel sometimes, Jim, like the government and industry is kind of finding its way through that AI corridor in the dark, feeling their way as they go. What are you hearing from your companies about where they'd like the balance to be for responsibility and accountability between the government and contractors when it comes to AI and AI security?
I think from a company perspective, you can sort of go, and I spent 10 years in the automotive sector, working for one of the large American manufacturing companies, that they just want some consistency across the board in the way that these are applied, these regulations, any rules coming out, so that it does not favor one size company over another. And that if there needs to be accountability, that there is a standard that is set or expected prior, to something happening. And so, it is some minimum safeguards and minimum, sort of floors of what companies must have. And if they have those, there's some limited application if, things were to go awry. But this clarity, I think, is a good thing. And we know, Terry, our adversaries are using advanced technology to attack the American system. So having safeguards is something they're already doing, and having some guidance from the U.S. government is a good thing.
Jim Carroll is CEO of the Professional Services Council. Jim, I appreciate you joining me today, and we'll keep our fingers crossed for future World Cup victories.
Thank you, Terry.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.